There's a lot of factors involved, if I may. Fight, flight, reactions based on your trauma history, your brain development. It's very complicated.
Is it fair to say that when one particular emotion...
All right, could you unmute, please?
Yes. Hi, Judge. How are you?
Hi, all right. I just wanted to make sure that your sound was working, our sound is working, because the jurors are going to come in. My understanding is that you may have something you would like for the jurors to view.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I did develop a PowerPoint. So, you know,
All right.
if that's okay.
State, have you seen the PowerPoint?
Judge, I'm halfway through. It's 45 slides. We would be at this point just opposed to it. It seems that some of the material may not be relevant that he can testify to, and it may be misleading to the jury because there's very big portions explaining many different attributes to it that don't have any relevance with this particular defendant.
If they would like to proffer it for the record, we can proffer the testimony for the record. And
Well, I haven't seen the slides, so show me the slides.
yes, Your Honor, can I email it to the court?
Yes. Any objections to them emailing it to the court?
No, Your Honor.
Oh, everyone, please be seated.
I believe it's sent, Your Honor.
All right. I'm waiting for it.
That good old Bear County Wi-Fi.
Deputy Laura, they have something that they want to go over. So, all right, thank you. All right, we're on the record and we're going to go over this PowerPoint. So, if everyone could get on the same page that the court is on, the court is in receipt of the PowerPoint that I believe the witness, Dr. Fabian, would like to present to the jurors. All right, first slide. Any objections to the first slide?
No, Your Honor.
Second slide, any objections?
No.
Third slide, any objections?
No, Your Honor.
Fourth slide, any objections?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, what are the objections to slide number 4?
It seems that they're just putting down his testimony in writing. And just at this point, hearsay, Your Honor.
It's a demonstrative, Your Honor. We're not offering it for the jury to take back. The state had several demonstrative exhibits we didn't object to, but I don't think that we could have.
All right, so here's the thing. So both parties will know objections that people made or did not make to other sides. That's not a factor in my consideration on whether or not something should be admitted. So with regards to this slide that we're on now, state, it appears that it's related to, just one moment. It appears to the court that these are risk factors that are specifically related to the defendant. Is that correct? And Dr. Fabian, you can unmute yourself, please.
Sure.
And I'm gonna go ahead and swear you in. Can you raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you give will be the truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I swear.
All right, you can lower your hand, state your name for the record.
Yes, John Matthew Fabian.
All right, is there going to be any objections to this witness appearing by Zoom?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor, it's at our request. Thank you.
All right. Any objections, because I want us to get to the point of these slides, any objection to the court asking the witness a couple of questions with regards to these slides so that I can see whether or not they should be admitted as demonstrative?
I have no objection.
No objection.
All right, so the slide I'm looking at that says Tamar McIntyre mitigation themes, is that related to this defendant specifically?
Yes.
All right. So with regards to that, it appears that it is not demonstrative. It is testimony that he is going to be given about your client. So if it were a general slide about, we look at risk factors among adolescents, that would be fine. But this slide appears that it's specific testimony. So the objection to that slide is going to be sustained by the state. Then with regards to,
I'm so sorry, Your Honor. I got off. The slide titled Tamar McIntyre mitigation themes, you are
Yes.
saying is not admissible, or
No,
or not?
because that's his testimony. It's not a demonstrative. It's his specific testimony about your client. So that slide will be removed.
Dr. Fabian, will you be able to remove the slides from, since you were going to share the PowerPoint through Zoom, will you be able to remove the slides as the judge instructs?
Yeah.
Okay, so that one, number 4, the state's objection to that one will be sustained. Any objection to slide 5?
Objection, I don't think the relevance.
All right, what is the relevance, state, to the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention? That's sealed. What is-
Are you asking Dr. Fabian?
Yes, no, I'm asking you, counsel, because it just appears that this is a slide with a seal on it.
Dr. Fabian, could you advise as to why that slide is in your PowerPoint presentation?
Yeah, it's the author of the next slide.
All right, then the objection to that slide, number 5, that will be overruled. With regards to number 6, are these factors that you look at or that the author looks at in making a determination about a defendant's propensity or state in life, for want of a better word? Are these
Yeah,
factors you're
well,
considering?
yes, they are part of my testimony. So,
Dr. Fabian, are these things that are generally matters that you look into when you're making a forensic assessment of someone, or are they specific to Mr. McIntyre?
both.
All right, so this slide number 6, is this specific to Mr. McIntyre, or is this just generally all of the factors that you look into?
No, I mean, well, there are factors when we're dealing with a juvenile that's charged with homicide, but they apply exactly to his case.
All right, number 6, state that will be overruled. Number 7, that will be overruled, that will be allowed. Number 8, that will be allowed. Number 9, what are the objections to 9, state?
Your Honor, it seems at some point, I mean, as I read through these,
Yes.
they get repetitive. So I really like, it's just repetitive, and being, bolstering.
All right, so number 9, if you can remove number 9.
Okay.
Number 10, that will be allowed. Number 11 remains. Number 12 remains.
Your Honor, may
Yes.
I on that one?
Yes.
I see that there's X's at the end of some of these, and there's not X's on some. So I believe this is going to be direct testimony.
Is number 12, Dr. Fabian, is that direct testimony?
These are the 10 adverse childhood experience risk factors, and the 8 that are X'd applied to the defendant.
All right, so that'll need to be removed.
Okay.
And that's not saying that you can't testify if that is your testimony, but it just can't be given as a slide, because then it's not demonstrative. Number 13.
Well,
is-
and I'm sorry, Your Honor, you want me to just get rid of the X's and keep it no 8 and just have the 10 just as those factors?
I mean, if you want to say that, though, I mean, I don't know what your testimony per se
Mhm.
will be. I have an idea because I've seen you testify before, but state if he removes the X's.
I guess, Your Honor, then it'd be repetitive.
All right. So yes, if you'll remove slide number 12, please.
Yeah, repetitive, I'm sorry, to what? Because I don't have these factors on.
Oh, that's okay. If you'll just remove slide 12,
All right.
number 13, that remains. 14 remains.
Judge,
Yes.
I guess, I don't know, just that I don't want to rehash and I'll stop after this, but on this one, it just says life expectancy. I don't understand how that's even relevant to these proceedings.
Relevant because someone is going to be sentenced for a lengthy period of time, may die in prison, and that needs to be a factor that's considered.
Why? I don't think is whether their mortality rate, is that a factor in sentencing? Why would you say that?
I would submit that it is, because the question about how someone fares in prison, how their health will be handled in prison, do we expect that they will decline at a more precipitated rate than they would if they were in the free world, is a factor that can be considered by any sentencing authority, judge or jury.
All right. So if you'll remove slide number 14, you can ask whatever questions you want to ask about that. And if there are objections, the court will make a ruling on those objections.
Okay.
Number 15, I'm going to allow that. 16, objections.
Judge, and I guess the objection is just, I mean, a relevancy, and irrelevancy.
We have a fact witness who will testify after this that will make this relevant.
It's not relevant at this time, Your Honor.
It's conditionally relevant. I mean,
Well, if you say it's conditionally relevant, but if you don't have the person to testify, then
I mean, all I can say is that, as I stated in opening, and as I anticipate the evidence will show when we call a fact witness, this slide will become relevant. And that's my representation to the court. Obviously, If for whatever reason my evidence does not end up supporting that, the court is welcome to instruct the jury to disregard the testimony about multi-generational factors.
Okay, so with regards to slide number 16, number 20 and 21, what are their objections?
20 and 21, Your Honor?
Yes, I'm asking the state if they have any objections.
Judge, no, I mean, as long as it's not testimony about this particular defendant and this in general.
All right, Dr. Fabian, 20 and 21, is that general? I'm sure it's, is it general and then you're going to make it relevant to Mr. McIntyre?
I mean, that was the plan, yeah.
All right, so 20 and 21 can remain. All right, then let's look at 22, 23, 24, and 25. Those all seem to be the same as far as to what they're about.
Your Honor, I need to take care of a matter with the witness. If Mr. Lang can fill in for me
Sure.
for the rest of this hearing.
Yes.
Be right back.
Sorry, Judge, where did we leave off?
Oh,
No, right. So with regards to the court will allow the slides in up to number 25. Number 26, that seems that that's more testimony. So 26, if you can remove that and you'll just have to testify.
Which one is that one? Because I did remove them. I'm not, which one's that?
26 is do insecure adult attachment styles mediate the relationship between
Yeah.
childhood maltreatment and violent behavior.
Okay.
All right, meta-analysis of attachments to parents in delinquency.
I'm sorry, Judge, was there an objection to 20, I think you said 26?
Yes, 26 is, he will need to remove that slide, but he can testify.
Okay,
And then 27, the court is going to allow that. 28 will be allowed. 29, any objections?
you were saying relevancy, Your Honor.
we would offer it as a learned treatise, Judge. as an
All right,
exception.
29 will be allowed. 30, that will be removed. He'll just need to testify to that. And 30 is the brain development and trauma.
Yeah.
31, that will be allowed. 32 is allowed. 33 will need to be removed. You can testify.
Okay.
34, removed. You can testify. 35, removed. You can testify. 36, removed. You can testify.
And Judge, I'm sorry, I haven't, is the state objecting to these? being
They're
removed?
objecting to all the slides.
You're objecting
Yes,
just
yeah.
whole cloth to everything as hearsay or what?
Correct, yeah.
Mm.
You're saying relevancy.
Yes.
I would object to their objection. I hope the court would take note of that. I don't believe that any of these slides that you've removed from 30 to 36 would be inadmissible for any reason.
All right. So 36 will be removed, but you can give your testimony about it. And some of the reasons why, with regards to that slide, so the record is clear, this is just going to be his testimony. It's not necessarily demonstrative as it relates to that. That's testimony. 37, that will be allowed.
Which one is that one? Sorry.
37 is brain development and delinquency. And I'm allowing that because that's from a treatise, even though necessarily that's something that you could testify to, but I'll allow it.
What, and I'm sorry, Your Honor, the what does it start with? Like,
Empirical research
research.
supports.
got it.
Yes. 38 will be allowed. 39 and 40 allowed. 41, you'll just have to testify.
Okay.
So if you remove 41, 42 will be allowed. 43 is allowed. 44 needs to be removed.
Okay.
And let me know when you are ready to proceed. And is anyone going to need to take this witness, board this witness for his level of expertise?
So, we know. Dr.
Yes, I
Fabian,
think everybody does.
We understand that he's an expert in this.
All right, let's bring the jurors in. The next one is out of the taste of my mouth.
And Your Honor, I just want to make sure I understand. I think if I understand the court's ruling correctly, you've asked to remove these slides because they are reflective of his testimony, but you haven't made any preliminary rulings about the substance of the testimony. I'm allowed to
No.
ask those questions.
Yes, you're allowed to ask those questions.
Thank you, Judge.
And so the court is clear. The slides were removed because specific slides that the court ruled to be removed were removed because they're testimony and not demonstrative. The defense is allowed to ask the witness questions about those slides that were removed, but they're not demonstrative.
I
All right,
understand.
let's bring the jurors in.
All right, for the jury,
All right, everyone, please be seated. All right, defense, call your witness.
Defense calls Dr. John Fabian.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Fabian has been previously sworn in, so he's under oath. He's appearing by Zoom because he was unable to appear in court. So both parties have agreed that they have no objection to Mr. Fabian appearing by Zoom. Is that correct, State?
That is correct, Your Honor.
Defense, is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Dr. Fabian, if you can state your name for the record, please, and spell your last name.
Yes, John Matthew Fabian, Fabian.
All right, defense, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Dr. Fabian.
Good afternoon.
If you could briefly just tell the jury what you do for work.
I work as a forensic psychologist and a neuropsychologist.
And in addition to those fields, is there any other field that you have credentials or training in?
It's essentially clinical and forensic psychology and neuropsychology and law as well.
Okay. And in terms of the word forensic, that means that you're dealing with courtrooms a lot?
Yes, just addressing, answering legal, forensic, mental health, legal questions that courts, judges, lawyers have that I can address through evaluation typically.
How long have you been testifying about matters of forensic psychology?
About 26 years.
Have you published anything in this particular field?
I've published quite a bit. It basically in areas that I work in, such as, not guilty by reason of insanity, competency to stand trial, forensic assessment of violence, let's say, and basically neuroscience and violence or sexual violence. So basically publishing in areas that I practice in.
Now, you're obviously appearing to us through a television screen. If you could please explain what exactly it is that keeps you from being in court with us today.
Oh, it's another never-ending death penalty case in Harris County, Houston, Texas. So I've been here for this is a second week of just part of the trial. So that's what I've been doing.
In terms of this case, are you familiar with Mr. Tamor McIntyre?
I am, yes.
And were you asked to do a forensic consultation with regard to Mr. McIntyre and his case?
I was, yes.
If you could please discuss for me the things that you reviewed in order to prepare for this case.
Sure. So your team had provided me with some information just about his background history. So there's Tarrant County juvenile probation records that I had reviewed. I had also reviewed some police reports, I think, for him and family members. And there was, I believe, psychological evaluation from Tarrant County as well when he was a juvenile.
Okay, you mentioned family. Who did you speak with respect to Mr. McIntyre's family?
So I interviewed mother Jolena, sister Kayla, father Kevin, and paternal grandfather Russell.
Did you look into anything related to his academics or his intelligence or matters pertaining to that?
Yes, I had interviewed your client as well, or examined him on April 2nd and April 3rd, 2025. So I also obtained information about his background history from him.
Okay. Is that common to do, to get that kind of information self-reported from the patient or from the defendant?
Absolutely, yes.
Did you review anything with regard to Mr. McIntyre's mental health?
Yes, I did. That was primarily from the psychological report that was done for his initial juvenile case in Fort Worth and Tarrant County. And so he had been evaluated there by a psychologist. And that was, I think, in about 2016. And actually, I think the date of evaluation was November 15, 2016. This one was actually by Bear County psychologist Monica Jeter. And that provided me information. He had a history of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and treatment with Adderall for that condition.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about matters related to the psychology of an offender that are significant, both in this case and in cases generally? When you're trying to evaluate these matters to determine or to help talk to people who are determining a sentence, what are some of the things that you look for?
Well, just I look a lot at their background history and their family history. It's kind of where I start every case.
Okay. With respect to Mr. McIntyre, were there any risk factors
And
that
then
Sorry.
the information gathering is sorry.
Just one moment. So if y'all can make sure one person talks at a time. So defense, if you will ask your question, please.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. I think we might have had a buffering problem. I thought he was finished talking. Dr. Fabian,
Okay.
with respect to Mr. McIntyre, were there any aspects of Mr. McIntyre's history, whether it be mental health, family history, background and upbringing, that you were looking at to determine whether or not there were pre-existing risk factors before these cases came to light?
Yes, there were a number of areas pertinent to your question.
Could you?
So you want me to
Yes,
explain?
please.
Okay. Well, I look at this as multi-generational in nature. So I did talk to his mother. And if I may briefly describe her background.
Please.
Okay. She had informed me that she was.
I'm just gonna object to hearsay.
Sustained.
And Your Honor, just for the purpose of the record, we would be offering it as a statement that was obtained for the purpose of medical diagnosis.
For the purpose of this trial, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Without going into what she specifically said, Dr. Fabian, are there some aspects about the people in Mr. McIntyre's life and his parents that you thought were significant and relevant to what was going on in Mr. McIntyre's development?
Yes, there is a family history positive for criminality, substance abuse, mental illness, and prostitution. And those were factors that I thought were significant, for his parents and then when he was born. So that's kind of where I would start in my investigation.
Okay, and just before we go any deeper into that, can you explain a little bit what you mean by multi-generational trauma? What does that look like?
Well, it looks like the parents of the defendant had a lot of adversity and trauma in their lives growing up, and when he was born, after he was born, there was family separation and instability, and that's not uncommon with what I know about his parents' background history.
Okay, and when those kinds of circumstances are in play, what effects can that have?
That could lead to what we call developmental psychopathology in offspring. And that could be, psychiatric conditions that would be relevant to, Tamar and his siblings, let's say. It's my understanding that there was, maternal substance use during pregnancy with him, and he had early emotional behavioral difficulties, and then later depression, suicidality, and his own substance abuse problems.
What is polytrauma?
Polytrauma is just when someone has a number of different types of traumatic events that they've either been exposed to or witnessed.
So, like, for example, psychological and physical abuse, that would be a polytrauma case, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What
So
is-
go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Sorry, doctor.
Well, I don't know if you want me to elaborate as to his history of that.
Please.
Sure. He and his sister had Kayla had bounced around quite a bit. So they had lived with mom, and eventually they were, I think, in a hotel in Las Vegas, and she had been involved with crystal methamphetamine, and social services got involved, the police got involved, and they were taken, and they were placed in Child Haven, which is a orphanage setting, and they were then moved to different foster homes. And so there was abuse and I would say more emotional neglect within the foster home and in one particular placement. And then they had also witnessed significant domestic violence by father to mother I believe even before that. And father had gone to prison for that assault against mother. So eventually they were placed with their grandfather. And that was the most stability I think they had. That was a paternal grandfather named Russell. And he had them for about 4 years. And I think they thrived at that point. And then once father was taken out or was released from prison, he reached out and wanted the children. So they went back with father. And I think this is more in the Arlington, Texas area. And father and stepmother were raising Tamor and his sister Kayla for a while. I learned that there was abuse in that home and they started running away, especially Tamor.
Can you tell the jury about what damaged attachment is?
Damage attachment is really, well, the attachment processes is critical to, the child development. So it's really the connection, physical, emotional connection between child and caregivers. And then really it serves as a lens to how, a child views the world and how they develop emotionally, kind of how they think, perceive, the world and how they develop and how they socialize. And in this case, it was very, I would say, damaged because there was really a lack of stability and continuity and with the caretaking, because it was just they bounced around a lot to different states and caregivers, and they were involved with the system.
The more people that sort of fill that role as caregiver in an inconsistent and ad hoc way, does that have adverse effects on how children come to understand the world and how they relate to people?
Perfectly said, yes.
So in this case, you're evaluating questions related to, which I think you've called neurodevelopmental disorder, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then you mentioned also that there's the brain dysfunction issues. Is that the ADHD component that you discussed?
That, and it can be how the brain develops in a basically a traumatic environment. So those two issues of neurodevelopmental disorder, which would be ADHD as an example of one, but also just growing up with abuse and neglect can also affect how the brain develops as well. I can kind of show some slides if you wish, but on a PowerPoint, but basically that is relevant to the case here, because we have to remember he was, I think, only 16 when I think this offense occurred.
You mentioned that you prepared some slides to discuss some of the topics that you're here to discuss with the jury today.
Yeah, I did. Mm-hmm.
Would you mind sharing that with us?
Yeah, sure. Let me pull those up. I'm going to share my screen, Your Honor. Probably take over the screen here. Can you see what I got?
Yes.
Okay. So we covered some of this. Well, I don't need to talk about myself, but let me we may want to go back, counselor, but we're talking about attachment here.
Right.
Okay. And this is basically what I had mentioned before. And then if we're going to talk about the brain, well, first of all, just with development, it's relevant to self-identity, sense of self with others in the world, and really emotional regulation and social development. Okay. So the concerns I have in this case, and a lot of cases I do when there's damage attachment, is that there's going to be a risk for, like I said, we call it developmental psychopathology, but often that basically means mental health issues or conditions developmentally from childhood through adulthood. So
that slide there says the phrase insecure and disorganized attachment.
Yes. So, there's been studies just in juvenile delinquency, and they've, examined delinquents and found that they are at risk for two types of attachment conditions with caregivers, and one's insecure and one's disorganized. And in essence, they found that there is a correlation between attachment, and I will just call it damage attachment for brevity, and juvenile delinquency.
Now, are you familiar with these types of orphanages that serve as both the housing for the children that are in their care, as well as where they go to school, where they do their extracurriculars? So it's all on one campus?
Yeah, I used to work at one of those during my master's degree, and they're very similar, and they have, unfortunately, everyone is kind of in the same pot, so to speak. They all come from, broken homes with a lot of these kind of negative consequences, mental health issues, addiction, criminality, and so they're placed all together.
So that kind of an orphanage has some similarities to juvenile detention or to adult jails?
Yes, and oftentimes they don't have the deterrence in the orphanage because they're often not locked. Okay, so the kids can often run wild and cause problems within.
Within the facility?
Correct. And then in this case, Tamor was fostered out, I think, to it's my understanding, at least a couple foster families. One that was more consistent, it was about 2 years with a woman, and there was some concerns about abuse and neglect in that foster placement.
Okay, which would go back to this problem about improper or inadequate attachment based upon multiple caregivers, multiple situations.
Yeah, I mean, within the family and outside the family. So there was just a lot of inconsistency, instability, and that is obviously going to place a youth at risk to have some developmental issues.
Now, I did want to go back for a moment, Doctor. You had mentioned we might need to. Are you familiar with the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention?
Yes, I am.
And I gather that they've published some work on trying to assess these risk factors and how they may contribute to later life delinquency.
Yes, they have.
Could you talk to us a bit about that?
Sure. So, the Department of Justice has done research on just risk factors of juvenile delinquency, violence, and I would say even young adult violence. And they basically just found different domains that make sense, just individual risk factors inherent pursuant to that person's psychological, psychiatric functioning and mental health makeup, so to speak. Family factors have a lot to do with just the structure of the family, who's there, is it broken, who's raising the children, but also family management practices, including discipline, supervision, and then school, peers, and the community. So there, when we're looking at these cases, there is a cumulative type response or outcome. So the more domains and risk factors, the more likely the youth will have difficulties in life and engage in delinquent and violent behavior. So in this case, there are certain factors relevant. I can briefly go through them if you wish.
Please.
Well, this defendant, Tamor, had evidence of hyperactivity. He was not of low intelligence, but he did have a significant ADHD condition and treatment. There were emotional factors. It's my understanding that, he struggled without having, his parents around. And eventually there was again, some neglect where I think mom had left the children just abandoned in a hotel in Las Vegas. And that's when CPS got involved. later on, there was more stability with grandfather, but then not so much with father. There's more abuse. And that's when he was running away and engaging in more antisocial delinquent behavior, which connects to more of the peer factors. He was associated with, delinquent peers. And it's my understanding that both he and his sister, and more Timur, was running away from the fathers due to the abuse. And it was difficult, I think, for him to consistently attach to schools and his academics and success in that area because of a lot of the moves, neighborhood changes, let's say. So that's kind of how I conceptualize this case within the Department of Justice kind of risk factor domain, so to speak.
So within this concept of risk factors contributing to delinquency, is there any kind of a buffer that one can have when confronted with so many of these circumstantial risk factors?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the thing, what I consistently learned was that I think their most healthy and stable placement was some of that protection by the grandfather figure, Russell, but also he, got them to counseling. They were more involved in organized activities. And those 4 years, I think, were stable. And, there was less, I think, acting out. There was more structure. There were more expectations. And so it was protected not only by the caregiver, the grandfather, but also the opportunities he gave them.
So do these risk factors that we've discussed have any role in trying to predict the risk that someone might commit homicide?
They do. And so when we're looking at delinquency, but then, so there has been some research on this.
Could you tell us about it?
Yeah. Where they were looking at, the researchers were looking at a youth study with basically delinquents and looking at early risk factors in childhood and adolescence and as predictive of violence. And so they basically found a collection of them which are relevant in this case. So as I'm looking here, if you can see my arrow, I think they are all present here. And this was into, I think, homicide through age 30. So there were several factors of 28 that really kind of were more powerful. And another, again, this is correlation research. They found these are really significant to this youth group, and it's a pretty good sample size of over 1,500 kids. So as being risk factors related to homicidal behavior. And so that would be, I think pertinent to this case and Timur's background history.
So when you talk about those factors, you're talking about where the study looked at physical abuse, parental stress, bad friends, low school motivation.
Yes, that would be correct. And it's my understanding that these factors would apply in this case.
So fair to say, if your home life is tumultuous, if your peers in school are of bad company, and you have little hope or prospect for being able to succeed or carry forward with what you want to do with life, the risk that this kind of a thing happens goes up from a correlative way of speaking.
That is correct. Oh,
I'm sorry, just one moment. What's your objection?
Objection, leading.
Sustained.
I'll withdraw. Dr. Fabian, when these factors are present, what does that actually mean in terms of the risk?
Well, they're just elevated. So in this particular study, it looked at homicide in particular. But as far as we looked at the DOJ factors that I went over, those would be for delinquency. Now, these several factors focused on homicide.
What are the ACEs
The ACEs are adverse childhood experiences risk factors, and in brief, the CDC and Kaiser Permanente, they basically did physicals, examinations, and asked thousands of individuals about just childhood traumatic experiences. And they found that there were about 10 risk factors relevant to that were in childhood regarding traumatic experiences that were correlated with a risk of negative, what I call like psychosocial outcome. So it could be addiction, mental health, medical problems, addiction, legal problems, early mortality, let's say. And there were about 10 factors they found. And
What
they
are those 10 factors?
well, they focused on abuse and neglect. So physical abuse, emotional neglect, sexual abuse, parental separation and divorce, living with a person in the home that had addiction or mental health problems or legal problems and incarceration. And so there were 10 of them, and they found that 4 or more, basically a cumulative effect, but 4 or more out of 10 placed, the individuals in the study at more serious risk for like negative psychosocial outcome. And it could be anything or a combination of outcome. It could be, again, like unemployment, addiction, divorce, early death, for example. Okay. And I did run an analysis on your client, Mr. McIntyre. So
What did that analysis reveal?
well, it revealed that he had 8 of the 10. So pretty high score, and again, indicative of just abuse, neglect, and adverse child experiences.
So what you're saying is we can't really predict what negative outcomes someone will experience if they have these things, right?
You are correct. Now, there are some studies that are kind of focusing a bit more, on these factors and outcome.
But
Yeah, go ahead.
each of these things could be potentially provoked by having 4 or more of these factors.
Yes, which like these 2 studies, I think, address that. So just even with delinquents, they're more likely, or, with youth, they're more likely to engage in delinquency, in these negative outcomes, violence, gang involvements, addiction, general offending, when they have more of these risk factors. And this data pretty much, correlates with some of the DOJ data that we had just went over. It's just early risk factors. Yeah.
Okay, so fair to say the ACEs and complex trauma have some relationship?
They do. Now, complex trauma is a serious type of trauma, typically occurs in childhood and within the primary caregiver system. So often abuse, neglect by, a caregiver to the child. And they're often, the abuse, neglect occurs for a period of time. So it's a bit chronic, and then it can be intense, severe in nature, and it also can be frequent. And, again, we're looking at often physical abuse or neglect, sometimes, sexual abuse as well. And then this complex trauma really, has it's grips in early childhood risk for negative outcome, and when we see this complex trauma, it's often integrated with that damage attachment because it's often from a primary caregiver. And in this slide, there's just a lot of effects of complex trauma on one's development in a number of areas.
Can you talk about different ways that that kind of trauma might impair or impact a child?
Yeah, so as we see that there's attachment, deficits, just interpersonal difficulties. It could be, distrust, suspiciousness, also problems with just interpersonally, and also with developing best ways to, I would say, with empathy or perspective taking. There's also affective regulation, emotional regulation. And I know that Tamor had difficulties in that area, and he struggled with needing attention, support, affirmation from caregivers that were not in his life, or when they were in his life, very needy. And he was needy within the school with teachers, for example. So self-regulation, emotional regulation, but also behavioral control is relevant here. He has demonstrated difficulties with, self-control, destructive behavior, aggression, violence we've seen, and addiction. And he's qualified for substance use disorders when he was in the community. And as far as like thinking, cognition, I would look, there seem to be problems with attention, concentration relevant to, separately to his ADHD condition, but also difficulties with just appreciating responsibility. It's difficult when a kid's like growing up like this to also develop emotionally and in a mature way, like peers his age and are in healthier environments. I think that there was also like his self-concept. I mean, certainly, some of his vocational pursuits and, his musical talents, but, are impressive. But I think they cover a sense of inadequacy and a desire to be just connected with like his parents, which did not happen in consistent ways.
You're suggesting creativity is some sort of a coping mechanism for a lack of a stable household and early childhood trauma?
Well, some people are talented and some aren't. So yeah, I think he has some gifted and talented in that way. But so yeah, I mean, he developed other interests and skill sets, and there's some resilience there. But that I think he's plagued by inadequacy, especially with his just neglect for the most part by his parents.
Now, the literature you've been talking about seems to also discuss how these experiences, the emotional experience can have effect on the physical brain. Is that right?
Yes, that is what we've learned. Yes. Now, this slide of impact of childhood trauma in part is related to the prior slide. And we see in this case, and just by my review of the records, I mean, there's been, he's had some issues in a number of these areas. And I would look at more emotions, I think relationships here, mental health. I have seen, I think he has a long-term depressive condition, evidence of post-traumatic stress disorder. He's been suicidal in the past. And he's developed addictions to substances, I would say cannabis, Xanax, and more of what we call lean or cough syrup, let's say. And then certainly he's had issues in this area, which is a substance abuse, regulation, aggression, is criminal activity.
Can we talk a little bit about adolescent brain development?
Sure.
When does the brain stop physically developing, or does it?
Well, the brain, I would say the most important part of the brain would be developing, I'd say by age 24. And I'll show that here. Our brain develops bottom up from brainstem to kind of, survival, breathing, heart rate, through arousal, emotional reactivity. This limbic area is really the area of the brain that is responsible for emotions. And this area is more developed in a child, where finally this develops, I would say 23, 24. And that's more of your executive functioning, higher order area of the brain, abstract thought, problem solving, planning, executive functioning, decision making. That's more of the brakes on the brain, and the brakes to kind of assist in controlling impulses. It's another way to look at it. This is your frontal lobe. This is last to develop. This is your brainstem, first to develop. Your brain kind of develops this way. This is more the primitive brain, and that's the brainstem, right? So survival, breathing, sleep. The limbic area, that's kind of, again, more related to your emotions. And the amygdala is like your watchdog, your alarm. And that is more of the emotions and fear center of the brain, and as well as memory formation, where memories are. Finally, right here, that's more of the brakes in the brain, braking this area. And that's more of like a reasoning, problem solving, planning. So this is last to develop. And certainly this area of the brain is developing still at age 16 when all this was going on. With Tamar and his delinquency. That's in part why, adolescents are treated differently, within the court system. So this is the last area of the brain to develop, the prefrontal cortex.
So the parts of your brain that appreciate and react to fear develop before your brakes and your ability to judge and discern decisions. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and not saying that you have no ability to do that, okay? And not saying that every, adolescent becomes a delinquent, but the area of the brain that is still developing, yes, would be kind of the control area on the emotions. And in a case like this, there's a bit more, let's say, could be delayed development, but there's other factors going on in this type of case.
Doctor, just one
Sure.
moment. I noticed some movements in the seat. Yes, I'm going to give you all a break. Do y'all need a break? I thought someone did a break sign. All right. So I'm going to give you all a short break. If I could have you all back by 2:40, is that enough time for everyone? All right. Remember my previous instructions. Everyone, please rise for the jurors.